I want to just touch on your mentor, Eli, your journey with him. And then also I'd love for you to break down for folks who he is, what was so profound and seismic about the impact of his book, The Goal. I read The Goal, by the way, before you and I met, probably about a year and a half ago. Absolutely loved it. I found it just utterly fascinating to learn about the theory of constraints and the dynamics that can contribute to throughput and flow and productivity.
So Dr. Eli Goldratt he started off as a scientist, like many of these top, Deming was a scientist, etc. And he had done some research in terms of the flow of molecules and systems, how heat is transferred. And he had found out this concept of a singularity, that there was one thing that actually limited or governed the flow of energy through every system. He then got an opportunity to apply that to a manufacturing environment and found out that there was the same concept was there, that the biggest mistakes that you can make when you're trying to make commitments or you're trying to plan is to consider every possible resource. It makes it an almost unsolvable mathematical problem. When these resources, because they are all interacting with each other, there's variability, etc. You can dramatically simplify the problem if you focus on what's the bottleneck. What is that one resource that limits the throughput rate? It essentially governs the upper potential of what that system is capable of. The analogy is the weakest link, right? How many weakest links are there in a chain? One. Does it matter if there's 3 links or 300 links? No, there's always only one weakest link in the chain. And I think that insight to help managers focus on where to improve is profound, because suddenly I don't have to look at everything. I can try to find out where my bottleneck is. Unfortunately, what happens in real life systems is over time or by design, they design systems that have balanced capacities. So they say, look, we want to be able to cope with 10 customers a day, make sure that each of the processes can do 10 per day. But essentially what happens is you then create a system that is chaotic. The bottleneck is moving all the time, and it's really, really hard to make reliable predictions about what will come out. And it's extremely difficult to know how to manage that system. So a very counterintuitive way of doing it is to actually pick a resource and make that the bottleneck. Slow it down so that upstream there's enough capacity to build up inventory in front of your bottleneck to make sure your bottleneck is never starved. And downstream, there's some protective capacity to consume everything that the bottleneck can produce so that the bottleneck is never blocked. And if the bottleneck is never starved or blocked, the system will be able to do what the bottleneck is doing. And that insight was really profound. So the Goal was written about a real case study where, this Alex Rogo guy arrives at the plant, his executive is there, he gets hammered because another customer order was late, and he's troubled with this. Why is it that they can't get work to flow through the system, right? Why is it always taking them longer to complete orders than what they expect? And why does it end up costing them more?
It's amazing how cleanly the use of flow in the context of an operation or a plant like this analogizes to a psychological or a physiological flow state like we talk about. That was one of the things when we met that I just found fascinating.
Absolutely.
Both types of flow are so similar, even though they're completely distinct at the same time.
The second thing that has a great analogy with us getting into a flow state of mind is, imagine cognitively, we have the capacity to say, do 10 tasks a day. And we are currently only doing 3 tasks a day. So there's a huge gap there, right? Now, the question is, how are we losing capacity? How are we losing flow potential? The same is true in a factory, right? I often go into an environment and I say, okay, where's the bottleneck? The bottleneck, the design capacity is it can do 10, but your system is only doing 3 or 4. Like, where is the rest being lost? Yes, there are cases when we lose capacity, when we are starved of work or when we are blocked or when there's planned or unplanned downtime. But by far the biggest loss of capacity is when we produce stuff or work on stuff that's not needed now or may never be needed. So almost always the first job when we are implementing theory of constraints with a person or with a big company is to identify what they can stop doing to release capacity.